Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today we will be diving into a very interesting project with AWS services. We will be using services such as API Gateway, Lambda, DynamoDB. So what is DynamoDB? DynamoDB is used for storing the data in the NoSQL database format, and it stores your data in a serverless way. You don't have to manage the database, and it stores the data in the key value pairs. Then we'll also look into the Lambda functions. We'll create the Lambda functions and we'll write the REST APIs in Java. And we will supply the REST API or the APIs that we will be developing in the jar format to our Lambda functions. Then we will also be integrating Lambda with API Gateway in order to make sure that when the user sends a request, it is first sent to API Gateway. So API Gateway acts as a front door of a request coming from a client. So this is a high level serverless architecture that is being depicted over here. Serverless architecture is basically a event driven architecture in which whenever an event takes place, in that case, in response to that, the APIs are being integrated with the system and they are being invoked. And serverless architecture, basically, you can see in this particular diagram that there is a web app or a user is sitting at one end, and with the help of this web app, the user is making a request. This request, it is being sent to API gateway, and this API gateway is present. Let's say it is on cloud. API gateway is one of the services that is being provided by AWS, and then it redirects the service. It redirects the request to different kinds of services. So these could be microservices architecture. These could be different components in itself, and further, these services, they help in interacting either through to external APIs or to external databases. Either they do it synchronously or asynchronously. So that is about the serverless architecture at high level. But what we are going to do today is we are going to have a client, web or mobile. So basically, we are going to have a web application, or we can say we will have REST endpoints. We will be writing REST APIs. I already have the code with me. So we will be looking into that thing, and then that's a Java code. It will send a request. We will use Postman as the client in order to send the request. It will send the request to API Gateway. So API Gateway, it acts as a front door to which it receives the request. Then it triggers the event is in the format of JSON text is being sent to the Lambda function. Then Lambda function is also integrated with DynamoDB. It sends a request to DynamoDB. Let's say it is a GET request that is being sent by client. Then it sends the GET request to DynamoDB to fetch the data, and DynamoDB will send back the data to Lambda. And then the event is being again created, which is again in the form packaged in the form of JSON text, and it is sent back to your API gateway. Finally, API gateway will reply to the client with the data that the client has requested for through the through the HTTP request. So that is a complete flow of the application, or you can say complete flow of the services that we will be integrating today in the hands-on session that we'll be doing today. And these are the steps that we are going to follow while we are looking into this hands-on. So first of all, we are going to create a DynamoDB table, and this table will be the main table which is being used to store, retrieve, and delete the data, do all the CRUD operations, like creating the data, and it is used for updating the data, it is used for deleting the data. So we are going to do these CRUD operations. We will be creating a table in DynamoDB. Then we will be creating a Lambda function. We will also be creating an IAM role, and we'll be assigning it to Lambda function. Then fourthly, what we'll be doing is we are going to create resources and methods in API gateway. So we will be defining the endpoints. So user will be hitting certain endpoints, it will be making request to the API gateway. So for that, we will be creating resources and methods in API gateway. And once that is done, we are going to use an existing API, the Java code, and we are going to build the API. We are going to deploy the jar on AWS Lambda. We will upload the jar on AWS Lambda. And once that is being done, we are going to test the complete flow with the help of Postman client, and we will be sending out the request. We will be getting the URL, and we will be sending out the request flow takes place from API gateway to Lambda to DynamoDB. So the request flow I have already explained you earlier. So that is how the request will go on, and finally we will look into how you can clean up the resources that you have created. So whatever we are doing today, it covers everything under free tier. So AWS provides us free tier resources. So it has been DynamoDB, Lambda function, Lambda, and API gateway. All these three services are covered under free tier. But anyways, we can also take a look at how you can check that whether these services are covered under free tier or not. So let's get started with the hands-on. I hope you like this. You will like this video and you will implement it as well along with me. In case if you have any doubts, you can leave it in the comment section. And if you like the video, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Okay, so let's get started with the hands-on. Okay, so this is the link where you can go and you can check that whether the services that you're using is covered under free tier or not. So let's search for the services that we're using today. So let's say DynamoDB and I will hit enter. So it says Amazon DynamoDB 25 GB of storage is always free and it is also covered under free tier. So that is something, the storage part. Now let's look into the API gateway. So for API gateway, it says that 1 million API calls received per month. That is covered under free tier. So that service is also free for us. Let's look into the another service. There are certain restrictions or there are certain thresholds till which you can use these services under free tier. So you can make use of till that particular threshold. So let's check for Lambda. So for Lambda, it says that it is also covered under free tier and it accepts 1 million free requests per month. So that is what is acceptable when you are using these services under free tier. So now let's go ahead and sign into the console and we will be looking into how you can access the different services. Okay, so let's start by creating DynamoDB table. So let's select for DynamoDB in the search bar of services. So we have DynamoDB, which is a managed NoSQL database. Click on DynamoDB. Once you click here, you will be redirected to this page. You can click on create table in order to create a new table. Uh, Over here, you can give the details about the table. So let's say my table will be an employee table. So I will be creating a resource and I will be dealing with the REST APIs for the creation, updation, and deletion of my employees. And then let me give a partition key or a partition key or a table's primary key, which is employee ID, and I'm going to keep the type of this particular primary key as string, and all the other settings remain the same. And I'm going to click on create table. Once you click on create table, you will see that the table will start creating. So in the meanwhile, when the table is getting created, we can look into the next step, which is create a Lambda function. So we will go to Lambda. We will search for the service Lambda and we will go for Lambda function and we will create a new Lambda function. So you can see that the employee table has been successfully created. Now let's go to the next. Let's open a next tab where we will be opening a Lambda service. So let's search for Lambda in the search bar and we will be creating a Lambda function over here. So once we are here, we will click on create function. We are inside Lambda service. We will click on create function. Once we are in create function, we are going to create this function from scratch. So we are going to create everything from scratch. That's why we are going to select author from scratch. Otherwise you have other options as well. You can upload a container image, Docker container image. You can use a blueprint, that is build a Lambda application from sample code. So there is a sample code that is being provided, so you can use those sample codes as well. But today we are going to author from scratch. And then you have to give a function name. So let's say I give the function name as REST API function. Let's call it employee API function. Then the runtime. So we will be using Java today. So let's select the runtime as Java 11. So it says change default execution role. So we will be creating a new role as our Lambda function will be interacting with the DynamoDB. So I will be giving permissions to the Lambda function to interact with the DynamoDB. So we can click on this IAM console. So it will open in a new tab. And once we are in IAM console, we are in this roles which falls under IAM service, which is Identity and Access Management Service of AWS. We will select AWS service here. It says choose a choose a service or a use case. So let's say the service that I'm choosing is Lambda. So allows Lambda function to call AWS services on your behalf. So it will allow Lambda to basically call DynamoDB, and it will perform its services. So some of the permissions that we will be assigning today are two permissions. One is Amazon DynamoDB full access permission. Another one is AWS Lambda basic execution role. So let's search for those services. Amazon DynamoDB full access service. So we will be selecting this service. And along with this, we will also be selecting another service, and that service is AWS Lambda basic execution service. So AWS Lambda basic execution role. So this is the role that we will be adding along with that particular role. And then we will be clicking on next. We have to give an role name. So let's say I call it Lambda Dynamo role. Allows Lambda functions to call AWS services on your behalf. So that is a description that is already being given, and it has added these two permissions. One is Amazon DynamoDB full access permission, and one is AWS Lambda basic execution role. And then we will click on create role. So this has created a role for us, which is named as Lambda Dynamo role. So let's go to roles and we will check that whether the role is being created or not. Let's click on view role. So when I click on view role, you can see that the role has been created and two policies, permission policies have been assigned, which we selected earlier. So let's go back to our Lambda function, which we were creating. We will click on use an existing role. Once we click on use an existing role, it will show the role in the drop down. So just now we created this Lambda Dynamo role. We will select that particular role. Let's see what is there in advanced services settings. So we are not going to use anything in advanced settings as of now, and we are going to click on create function. So once you have clicked on create function, you can see that employee API function has been created for us. Lambda function has been created for us. And there is this option code, test, monitor, configuration, aliases, version. We will be looking into these options afterwards when we will be uploading the code. And when we will be checking the monitoring that is being enabled, we will go to CloudWatch and we will check the monitoring logs as well once we deploy our jar file and once we deploy our application. So let's move on to the next service now, which is API Gateway. Let's see what have we covered till now, what all steps we have completed. So first is create a DynamoDB table. We have already done that. We have created an employee table. Then create a Lambda function. We have created a Lambda function. We have also created an IAM role, and I have shown you what permissions or policies you have to attach to this IAM role. And then we have assigned it to the Lambda functions while we were creating a Lambda function. So this is the three steps that we have already done. Next, what we will be doing is we are going to create resources and methods in API Gateway. Then I'll show you an existing API, and we are going to upload the jar on AWS Lambda. Then we are going to hit the endpoints and we are going to check the resources that are being deployed, and finally we are going to clean up the resources. So the next point that we're going to check now is create resources and methods in API Gateway. Now let's open API Gateway service. We will search for API Gateway service in the search pane, and then we will click on API Gateway. Once we are on API Gateway console, we will be creating our API resources and endpoints. So it is taking some time to load. So one thing more which I want to let you guys know is, like, make sure that you are using the same region where you are deploying your application. So the DynamoDB region is Canada Central for me. Similarly, the Lambda function region is Canada Central for me. So for API Gateway also, I'm going to use the same region, Canada Central region. So once we are here, you can choose an API type, so that there are different API types that are giving: HTTP API, WebSocket API, REST API, REST API private. So today we will be building REST API. So what it says is develop a REST API when you gain complete control over the request and response along with API management capabilities. So we will click on build. So we are going to build up a new API. So we are going to select this option, create new API, and then we are going to give name to this API. So let's say I give name to this API as employee API, and it says, do you want to give a description, which is optional, so I'm not going to give that. And in API endpoint type, let it be regional only. Then click on create API. So once you click on create API, it will give you the default path, which is slash path. So now what we are going to do is we are going to create resources. So there are different types of HTTP request, and the different types of HTTP request which we know is get, which is used to fetch the resources. Then we have post request, which is used to send the data to our server. So let's say if you are logging into your account, so at that time you are making a post request, you are sending out your credentials, so that is an example of post request. Or let's say if you are creating a new employee and you're sending out a JSON, so that is also post request, you're sending that request to your server. Then there is a delete request, in which you can delete a resource, uh, or an entry in your database based on certain criteria. So there are different types of HTTP requests which you can send to the server. So today we'll be creating a request. So we will click on create resource, and then we are going to create a resource named employee, and we will click on create resource. So once we click on this create resource, it has created this resource. Now we are going to associate those HTTP methods with this particular resource. So let's click on this slash employee, and we are going to click on. Now we will create a method, a post method, which will help us to create an employee object or an employee data in our DynamoDB. So for that, we will select this particular resource and we will click on create method. And over here we are given an option Lambda function method type, so we will select the method type. So method type will be post method type, and it will be an integration with Lambda function. So API gateway will be sending the request to Lambda function. And then we are also enabling Lambda proxy integration. And then you can check that it is in CA Central 1, so it has to be in the same region. And then we are going to select the Lambda function in the drop down. So once we select this Lambda function, we can click on create method. So you can see that this post method has been created. Now the next method that we will be creating will be a get method. And so once again we will click on this slash employee resource, and we will be creating another method, which is a get method, and we will be fetching our data on the basis of employee ID. Sorry, for that we will be creating a new resource. So let's create a new resource in order to fetch the employee on the basis of employee ID. So we will create this resource, and this is the resource name. So the URL will be slash employee slash the path variable, which is employee ID, which we will be passing once we use the post method in order to create the employee records. So we will be clicking on create resource. Now we have created this resource. Select this particular resource, and we will be associating a method, get method, to this particular slash employee ID resource. So again, select this slash employee ID and click on create method. And in this, we will be selecting get method. And over here, we will be selecting the same Lambda function which we already have, and we will be clicking on create method. So what it has done, it has created two resources and two methods for us. One is for creating an employee object in our database. Another one is to another one is to fetch the employee details. Now let's create another resource. In that resource, what we will be doing is we will be fetching all the employees from the database. So for that, let me select employee. Let me create a resource. Let me see the endpoint that I'm going to create. So the endpoint that I'm going to use is slash employee slash employees. So let's name this as slash employees, and we will again click on create resource. So this resource has been created, and we will be associating a get method because we want to fetch the details of all the employees which have been saved in the DynamoDB. So again, you can select this particular endpoint or resource, and you can click on create method. You can click on get method, and you can select the Lambda function in the drop down. So this is the same Lambda function, and you will be clicking on create method. We can also create delete method in a similar way, but today I will keep it till these get methods and the post method request. So let's look into what is the next step once we have created the resources. So once we have created the resources, we are going to look into an existing API and deploy a jar file on AWS Lambda. So today I will be taking code from her repository. Her name is Lipsa Patra. So I'm thankful for her to sharing her repository with us. I have seen it in one of her YouTube videos, and I'll be using this particular code. So let's use this code and let's generate the jar file. So I have to taken the code in my local. So if you want to understand the code, I will not go through the code much. So this is the employee class, which is annotated with that dynamo table db table, and we have already created a table with the name employee, and then there are different attributes, or let's say these are the key value pairs or the columns that will be created. So basically employee id is the one that we have already created, the name and email are the other ones, and then there are setters and getters, a typical entity class, that is what it is being defined over here. Then there is an employee service class which saves the employee object and which also gets the employee object by employee id. You can go through the code if you want to go through the code. Let's run the code and let's see how it looks like. So let's say mvn clean install, and once I run this command, it will generate the jar file for this particular code, and then we will take that jar file and we will deploy it on our AWS Lambda. We will import it and we will deploy it on our AWS Lambda function. So this is building our jar file, and the jar file will be present in the target folder. So let it complete the build, and then we will go back to our Lambda function and import this particular code from our local. So it says build success. So if you go to this target folder, you can see that it has created this jar file which is named as CRUD API using AWS Lambda DynamoDB, and we will be importing this jar file. So let's go back to our Lambda function, and we are going to import this particular code in our Lambda function. One more thing before we go to Lambda and we import that code in our local, what we have to do is we have to construct these, create these resources and methods. And when we once we have created these resources and methods, we are supposed to deploy our API as well. So we will click on deploy API, and we will be creating a new stage. And let me call the stage name as development stage. In the deployment description, let's give deployment development stage, and we will click on deploy. So this will basically activate the deployment of our employee API. And once we go here, we can see that these are the endpoints that we have already defined with the correct methods. Now let's go to Lambda function and let's try to import the code, the jar file that we have just now generated and which is present in our target folder. So this is where we are inside our Lambda functions. So this is the Lambda function which we created just now, and we will click on upload. We will go to code and we will click on upload from. So once you click on upload from, you are getting two options: either upload from .zip or .jar file, or you can upload it from s3 location. So as of now we are uploading a jar file, so I will click on this option, .zip or .jar file. I will click on upload button, and then I will select the jar from my target folder. So once I have selected the jar from my target folder, I will click on save button. So it is taking some time to upload the jar. So it has uploaded the jar for us. Now we are going to make some changes. So you can see that the jar file has been uploaded. It says code properties, package size. So the jar file has been uploaded. Now we are going to make some changes to the runtime settings, and we will be clicking on edit button. Once we click on edit button, so this is the handler that we have over here. So what is this handler? This is basically a package name, and then the class name, and then the name of the method. So let's go to the package name, class name, and the name of the method which we are going to use today. So let me just copy paste the package name, class name, and the name of the method that we are going to use today. So the package name is com.app.easy to excel. So I will replace that. And then we have the method name. So sorry, class name. So let me select the class name. Class name is Lambda handler. So I will select the class name, and the method name is handle request only. So let it be handle request. So this is what we are going to put in the handler, and we are going to click on save button. So now we are ready with our code being deployed. We are ready with the correct runtime configuration settings. Now we are going to hit the particular APIs endpoints, and we are going to see how we can fetch the relevant data, or we can also post the data. So let's go to post API, and you can see that this is the URL, invoke URL. So you can use this URL in order to send a post request, and in order to create a JSON object. You can create a JSON object, and you can send the post request, which will uh, go to your API gateway, and from API gateway it will go to the Lambda function, and from Lambda function it will go to your DynamoDB, and it will create the JSON, the key value pair that you're giving inside your DynamoDB. So basically, inside table, the values will be created with the help of this particular post request. So let's go to our Postman and see how we can hit this particular URL. Postman now. So inside Postman, we will create a new request. But before going to Postman and creating a new request, let's go to our API gateway and let's see what is the URL that we have got. So we will copy this particular URL over here, and then we will go to Postman. So let's create a new request. It's an HTTP request. So we are going to post, that is, we are going to create an employee object. Then we will be going to body, and we will be selecting JSON over here, and in this we will be copy pasting the body. So let me take it from an existing one. So okay, so let's go to the HTTP request once again, and let's put the body here. Let's go to raw, let's go to JSON, put the body, and we will go to our URL. We will copy the URL, and we will put it in post, and we will send. We will click on send button. So once we have clicked on this send button, it should create an object, or you can say it should create key value pairs data inside a DynamoDB. So let's go back to DynamoDB and see that whether the data has been created or not. So this is our employee table. We will go inside the employee table. We will click on explore table items, and inside this you can see that our record has been created over here. It is the same record that we just executed through Postman. Other request that we can execute is a get request, in order to see that whether it fetches all the employees or not. So we will go back to our API gateway. We will click on the get request, and we will copy this URL, and then we will go to our Postman. Inside Postman, we will again copy paste this URL, and we will send the request. So you can see that it has replied with the correct data which we have saved on our DynamoDB. So this is how you integrate your API gateway with your Lambda functions and with your DynamoDB. Now let's look into how you can clean up the resources. So this is the part where you have come till now and you have created all the resources. Now let's look into how you can clean up those resources so that you don't get charged by AWS. So we will go back to our DynamoDB table, and Before going to DynamoDB table, I also wanted to show you one thing. Inside my Lambda function, if I go to monitor tab, you can see that there are CloudWatch logs that are being created. We will click on view CloudWatch logs. And once we are in the log groups, we can see that the logs are being generated in CloudWatch. So this is the Lambda function employee API function, and you can see that the logs are being created for this particular. So you can click on this log stream, and once you click on this log stream, you can see that these logs are being created. Fetch employee log has been created, and all different records has been created. So all these logs, they get created on CloudWatch. So this video has become really long. So in order to keep it short, I just wanted to let you know that now you can start deleting your resources. So first of all, you can start with DynamoDB. You can go to your DynamoDB and you can start deleting your resources. And then you can go to your Lambda function. You can delete this particular Lambda function. You can go to CloudWatch. You can delete the log groups that are being created. And then you can go to API gateway and you can delete these APIs as well. So you can start cleaning up your resources. And I hope you enjoyed the video and you followed along the video. So we did a great project today, and it could be very fruitful for your AWS journey and also for your resume. So all the best for your cloud journey, and stay tuned. Please subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Bye bye.